Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is February 24th, 2017, and we are now approximately 1 month into the presidency of Donald J. Trump, and we are freaking out. Some people are freaking out because they're pleased with the efforts Donald Trump is making to fulfill his campaign promises, and other people are freaking out because they're upset that he won and worried that he may become a dictator, the next Hitler. I think it's really important to put some perspective on this and realize that we have a long tradition in this country of a peaceful transition of governments from one president to another president. And there are many, many reasons why people chose a Republican over a Democrat. And one of them that we need to remember is that this is a tradition among Americans. And if you look back to switch, this tradition is to switch from party to party, particularly after 8 years have passed. So Donald Trump had an advantage over the Democrat, Hillary Clinton, just on that account. Even if you forget about all the other difficulties, the advantages that Trump had, being a guy who kind of walks into a room and sort of dominates, and his populist leanings, his appeal to what he called the forgotten men and women of the United States, whereas Hillary Clinton was more about the coastal states and really didn't care much about the so-called flyover states. He concentrated on the flyover states, and because he knew that his goal was to get the Electoral College. He knew the Electoral College would win him the presidency. So he had a lot of advantages that Hillary Clinton did not have. Many people didn't like Hillary Clinton, and even people who ended up voting for her only voted for her because they disliked Donald Trump even worse. And you know, really about the only mud that has more or less stuck to him since the election is the comments about grabbing the genitals, and that was a kind of a braggadocio statement that he made on television. It was part of a much larger little narrative that he was talking about what it was like to be a star, and how that women would just let you do whatever you wanted because you were a star. If you talk to other stars, movie stars, you will realize that this is just the way it is. Rock stars, the same thing. They are fawned on by women. I've seen this personally. Even stars that are not as big as somebody like Bruce Springsteen or, I don't know if Bruce Springsteen did a lot of womanizing, but a lot of those stars did, and they would take advantage of that. Playboys. I mean, no question, Donald Trump was a rich playboy and a star. He made himself into a star. You have the Trump brand. You have him being the host and star of a popular television program. You have his money the allure of his money, the glamour. He was a good-looking guy when he was younger. He's not so good-looking now. He's 70. So all those things combined, and that gave him a sense of power. I mean, I've seen this personally with my observations throughout my life of the way women, young women particularly, behave around rock stars. Even not the top tier of rock stars, but the second tier of rock stars, like Little Feat. I remember very well an experience of when Little Feat came to town. Most young people won't even remember Little Feat, so they're not that big, not like the Rolling Stones or something, but they were a very respected rock band. And they could just pick girls out of the audience to go home with them, and they would just go. It was considered to be like a big feather in their cap and an honor to be chosen to sleep with the members of Little Feat. And this is just one example. Anybody who's gone to or been around rock stars, and essentially that's what Donald Trump was, a TV star, a rock star, a movie star, it's the same thing. You know, the old idea of in like Flynn. Errol Flynn was that kind of star. He was a big star in the 30s and 40s, and he essentially could sleep with whatever woman he wanted. And he did. Sports stars, the same thing, exact same thing. People fawn on you. People are almost literally groveling at your feet. They're treating you like royalty, literally. I mean, they're literally bowing, and they're not exactly saying, Your Highness, but they essentially are treating themselves as underlings and unworthy, and if you would give them a little bit of attention, then they're just so grateful. You know, it's sickening to watch. It's very undemocratic. But this is the way aristocracy works. This is how aristocracy gets established. Some people just naturally want to kowtow and can't help themselves to fame, wealth, power, that cachet, that mystic aura that seems to surround people who have political or other kinds of power. JFK was a tremendous womanizer, and he had the advantage of being young, good-looking, wealthy, and the president. And he took full advantage of that. I just saw a very good film called Jackie about a few days or a week or so after the assassination. An amazing film. If you've done a lot of research on the Kennedy assassination like I have, you can pick out the little hints that will reveal to you how much the filmmakers actually understood about what happened on that day and before and after the day that Kennedy was assassinated, JFK was assassinated. And you can see clearly that they're questioning the official version of what happened. And I thought it was revealing that in the film they're watching the television and Oswald is on, and Oswald is saying, you know, I only just recently found out why I was arrested. If there's anyone out there who would be willing to represent me, I would really appreciate it. And he sounds very sincere. I think it comes across, this is the voice of innocence here, of being startled of what happened, as what has happened to him. And they didn't show the one where he says, I'm just a patsy, but nowadays they don't let the patsy get on television. They learned their lesson. And a patsy, for those who don't know, is the guy that gets blamed for crime. He's the guy who gets set up and then takes the fall. He's the patsy, and it's sort of a underworld or mob term. But the mob, the underworld, the criminal element, and the government are very often the same thing. Criminals are attracted to positions of power, and oftentimes they have the money, the connections, and the will to seek power because they want power, they love power, and it will help them in so many ways. They like to have power over other people. So, but I thought it was very revealing, and it's worth seeing. And there's a very spooky quality about the film. It's almost like a horror movie. It's filmed in a documentary style. You have the camera following Jackie around as she sort of wanders through the White House as this almost ghostly figure who's more and more ignored. And after Jack Kennedy has been assassinated, and she becomes almost a non-entity. But she's not at all a non-entity. She's very smart. She sees what is going on. And I was talking to my girlfriend about, I said, it seems like Jackie knows she's surrounded by the murderers of her husband. And she said, I felt the same thing, that she knows. She doesn't know the details maybe, but she senses it. And you can tell, you get that feeling by the way people treat her. And there's one very interesting scene where Bobby Kennedy asks everyone to sit down, and the new president, Johnson, looks at him. He doesn't want to be ordered around by Bobby Kennedy with such hatred in his eyes. And there's no word, he doesn't say anything. He says, what did you say to me? And we know historically that Johnson absolutely despised the Kennedys. And he didn't like Jack or Bobby. And of course he also was very ambitious and wanted to be president. And more people today believe that Johnson was involved. He knew that the assassination was going to happen, and he said nothing. And he famously went to a meeting, and his mistress, yes, Johnson had a mistress, even though he was married to Lady Bird, was sitting out there, and he came out after the meeting and said, those effing Kennedys will never bother me again. They will never insult me again after tomorrow. This is the night before the assassination. And that's a paraphrase. It's not exactly what he said, but close enough. And so there's much that goes on in the world that we're not allowed to know. We're not supposed to know. We're supposed to listen to our government and believe the media and believe all the images, all the books that are officially sanctioned. And we're not supposed to believe anything that is not officially sanctioned by the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Los Angeles Times, what the White House says. Now, right now we have the left very much questioning our president, and the right not question our president so much. Although many of the establishment Republicans truly despise Trump. So Trump is the odd man out. He's getting flack from both sides. He is despised by the establishment on both sides of the aisle, both the left and the right. And to me, this is proof, this indicates that Trump is on the right track, because on both sides of the aisle, the establishment is in the pocket of the multinational corporations, the multinational banks, the super power elite, the super wealthy, who make Donald Trump's wealth look like pocket change. $8 million, $8 billion, $10 billion. How about $100 billion? Or half a trillion, or a trillion, or 2 trillion? Because yes, the 8 men who are supposed to be the world's richest men are not the world's richest men. They're not even, they're maybe the second tier. But there's a whole other level of wealth that is above scrutiny. They're above the law. They're above the notice of the mainstream media. They will not talk about these people. They will not mention their names. When was the last time you heard the name Rothschild, or even Rockefeller, for that matter, in the mainstream media? There is a complete blackout on the entire triangular head of the pyramid. You know, that triangle that sits at the top of the pyramid with the eye in it? Mark Zuckerberg and the rest on that level, who have $8 billion or 10 or no wait, Mark Zuckerberg has more than that. I guess Trump would be maybe on the 3rd tier of wealth, or the 4th tier, because Zuckerberg has, I don't know, at least like 40 billion, and then something like that. And you have these other guys who have more than that, but none of them is over 100 or 2 billion, not even close. But there are trillionaires. The Rothschild family were billionaires back in the 1800s, the early 1800s. And you have billionaires like Soros, George Soros, who are Barry and the Koch brothers. They're not even in the top tier of the 8 men who are supposedly the wealthiest men. But the people at the very top of the pyramid have deliberately removed themselves from the public spotlight. Now, the Rothschild family used to be in the public spotlight. They were talked about in the newspapers. There was even movies made. There was a movie called The Rothschilds, which outlined one of the most famous events in the history of the Rothschild family, when they lied to the London stock market about who won the Battle of Waterloo, and by manipulating the stock that fell precipitously and buying it up at really rock bottom prices, they essentially bought England and a great deal of Europe in one day for bargain basement prices. And of course, as soon as the word came out that had been suppressed, that Wellington actually won the Battle of Waterloo instead of losing it, and Napoleon was defeated, suddenly the stock market, as you might well expect in London, soared. It soared. And the wealth that was generated for the Rothschild family that came into their pockets was beyond belief at that time, and even today. You can't even imagine. This is manipulation and deceit for private gain. And people like George Soros do the same kind of thing on a much smaller level, but Soros manipulates currencies, and many of these guys at the very top who like to keep themselves out of the spotlight work behind the scenes. They're creating presidents, they're creating prime ministers, and they're getting people in power who they can control. And what type of person is the most desirable as the leader of a country? For the super elite, for the masters of the world, masters of war, the puppet masters behind the scenes, the man behind the curtain. The kind of leader who is most desirable is the kind of leader that you can control. You, the puppet master, can control. And how do you control that kind of leader? You control a person by having the ability to expose him or destroy him. And how do you get that ability? You find someone who has a vice so egregious and a skeleton in their closet so horrific that merely by threatening to expose or open the door of that closet and expose that skeleton, you can control them. And so that is why the leaders that are picked to be major, most powerful people on the planet are people like Bill Clinton, and then, for instance, Ted Heath, a perfect example of an incredibly dangerous serial pedophile and maybe have been a child murderer too. Ted Heath, the Prime Minister of England. This was just revealed in mainstream press. I have friends who've known about the pedophilia crimes of Ted Heath for 15, 20 years. And they just shrug their shoulders. They've known about it for so long. And it shows what I don't know that I just found out about it myself. How little I know compared to other people. Alex Jones said that he revealed it 15 years ago on his show. I wasn't even watching Alex Jones or listening to Alex Jones 15 years ago. And many other top people. Right now, across the world, there is a roll-up of pedophiles. This is because the intelligence communities have gathered together and they've decided that since Trump was coming in, they might be able to pull off they might be able to culminate their investigation and actually get some action on destroying the vast pedophile rings in the United States. But it's an international effort. So they must be working with the Canadian intelligence agencies, the Canadian law enforcement, British law enforcement. And really that's the only way you can make it work nowadays. The enforcement agencies have to work together because one enforcement agency may be threatened by the leadership. And why are they threatened? They're threatened because the leadership is being threatened. They may also be involved in the pedophile ring. But they're starting with the low-level people, and those people will sing. They will reveal their contacts. They will reveal their customers for a reduced sentence. And you will go up the food chain to the very top of the halls of power. And that is what needs to be done. And people say, oh, the pedophilia has been going on for a really long time. And we think of the Catholic Church and other churches. And yes, and it has been going on for all time. That just confirms how serious the problem is. And that it hasn't been stopped. And that because people can maybe turn a blind eye to ordinary corruption, but pedophilia, if they know about it. Because this is a horrible danger to everyone, anyone who has children. It is no wonder that people are fearful for their children in the United States and in other countries, more so than they used to be. If anything, the problem has gotten worse. Children literally kidnapped. This is around the world. China, India. I just saw a movie called Lion in which there was some brief sort of skirting around the edges of this problem. It was a true story about a boy who was lost in India and almost got himself in a mess by being almost kidnapped. He got away, according to the this true story. But people find that children are valuable commodities. And this is why so many children disappear around the world. Hundreds of thousands, or if not millions of children disappear every year. And some of them are found, but many of them are never found. They just vanish. And these children are being murdered in these horrific exploitation of children rings. And so this is a serious problem that has to be dealt with. And the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is apparently going to actually respond to this effort, whereas other previous Attorney Generals, not so much. They're too bound up, too caught up in the whole system. They're not rebelling against the system. They're part of the system. You need rebels. You need revolutions in systems. It's a healthy release, and it cleans out the dead wood. Or as Donald Trump says, we're draining the swamp. And whether he will be able to succeed or not, that remains to be seen. But for all his failings, he nevertheless is making an effort to address some of these issues. Now, I was just reading an article in the paper today about the new problem with methamphetamines. And around here, until recently, most of it or all of it was locally made. Well, now the big boys are moving in with, guess what, methamphetamines made by the big drug cartels, along with the heroin, along with the marijuana, along with the cocaine, in Mexico. And then, guess what, smuggled over the border into the United States. Then to the major cities, the capitals of the states, then distributed to the smaller distributors, out into the small towns, into the rural areas. And we're seeing the almost literal destruction of the American population by this scourge of drugs. Because people get addicted, they don't have any money, they don't have anything to do, they have no job, they have no useful work to make them feel good. People need work. They need to work. It is essential for human happiness to have useful work. Even more essential than having really a good job, a high-paying job, a decent wage, at least it's better than no wage. And this idea that people can just sit around their whole lives and get a check from the government, and that is somehow going to be okay, and that's going to work for them, that is not going to work for them. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature to think that having people just sitting around waiting for a check is good enough. And this is where, this is one of the major failures of socialism and communism. These countries in which people don't have jobs and are supported by government checks, these people are going insane. They're not happy. It's not money. People need to feel useful and do something useful. They're going to become, what do they say? The devil, what is it? The devil, idle hands is the devil's plaything or something. And they will get into trouble. We're seeing this in Sweden right now. You have an enormous population of immigrants. They just flood in to Sweden. Sweden doesn't really have that many people. It's sort of underpopulated by American standards or British standards or Japanese standards. And so but they've taken in a larger percentage, something like 150,000 Muslim immigrants in the last couple of years. And I was just reading that something like 500 of those people have found jobs. And the rest are just sitting around in their cozy apartments around in the suburbs of Stockholm, and they're in these sort of ghettoized but very nice areas, a whole suburb of beautiful homes, beautiful apartments, very nice, very well made, not crap. I've seen the video. These people are getting the most generous benefits of any European country, supposedly, maybe even better than France. And so people are flocking there because they're poor, they're struggling from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Eastern Europe, from Central Asia, so essentially from all over the world. I don't know about South America, but Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia, and they're all trying to get to Sweden. And the Swedish people are very warm-hearted, giving people, and they've had it very good for a long time. They're prosperous, they're hardworking, they keep their country gorgeous. If you've ever been to Sweden, it's a beautiful country, very well maintained homes, much better than around here, far better. I mean, we're building with, essentially tin, plastic, and pine, cheap pine, and they're building with stone and brick and tile. These homes are just really solid. Well, anyway, so these people from so many different cultures, and this is the cultural enrichment, are crowding in, and they have nothing to do. They're just getting a check. They're just waiting for their check. And these, particularly the young men, are just going nuts. They're raping, they're pillaging, they're looting, they're burning cars, they're throwing things at the police, they're just causing trouble, they're selling drugs. And this is what people do when they don't have useful work. They feel so miserable that they turn to medications, whether it would be alcohol or drugs, to make them feel better. This is just standard, because they're not getting the opportunity to do something to make them feel good. And what do I mean by that? You know, if someone gets in a ditch and digs up a water line and gets down there in that ditch with that pickaxe and that shovel and digs out around that water line and finds that leak, and it may be muddy, and it takes them all day, and they're tired, they're happy. That's a happy man. That's a happy man in that ditch. And I've seen it, I don't know how many times, I've been there myself. But you are involved in something useful. You know that work has to be done. Somebody has to do that. There's a leak in that water line, or maybe it's a drain that isn't draining right. It's got a clog, and there's no other way you can get to it. But usually you can snake those out without digging too much. But sometimes you can't. You have to get in there. And this is what most people would consider the most humiliating and difficult job that a homeowner or just an ordinary working guy would have to do, like plumbing. Maybe worse would be where it's actually shit. You got to wait around with boots and shit. I fortunately haven't had to do that, but nevertheless, this is satisfying work. Because you're actually doing something. You're helping somebody. That family needs to have that water line fixed or replaced. And there's so many jobs like this that need to be done, that are important work, that are way more important, in fact, than sitting at a computer day trading or something. I mean, it's sort of fun to make money day trading, but you get out there in the light, in the air, in the breeze, or the heat. If it's in the summer, you're sweating. But this is what people need. I'm not saying that everybody needs to get in a ditch. There's so many things that need to be done. And this is one of the dangers, of course, of living in the 21st century, because many people aren't getting that opportunity. It used to be that people would dig in mines, and it took thousands and thousands and thousands of men around the world, coal miners, digging for coal by hand with explosives, very dangerous work, pickaxe, shovels, hand work on those coal seams. And nevertheless, I mean, I know this is coal country, formerly was coal country, and they look back on those days of being a coal miner when they worked in the coal mines, and they got a very good wage for doing that. They look back, those old coal miners, with regret. They wish that those days were back. Maybe it was dirty, it was dangerous, it was hard, it was bad for their health, but they were doing something. They knew that coal was being used to make the lights come on in their town, in their county, in their state, in their country. That they had an important job to do. And now, most coal mining is done with machines, huge machines. You need operators, but not very many. You just set that big machine up and it just digs by itself, pretty much. The days of hand digging are gone. And there was exploitation back there, and it was terrible. People do get exploited, horrible things. There was always a negative side to it. And you could say, well, it's good. Those days are gone. Yeah, it is good. People shouldn't have to, die from black lung disease from working in the coal mines. And it's good. Automation is good. I'm not knocking it. But what are people going to do with their lives? And you could say, well, people just need to get off their butts and get out there and get to work and get doing things. And that's true. They do. You could say that. You could say, well, I'm not going to give them any sympathy. I found a job. I got out there and did something. I learned to do something. Maybe it's partly the mindset that people aren't necessarily being encouraged to do that. They believe that, well, I'm not going to go out there and dig in the dirt and dig in the shit and repair things and keep the infrastructure going, or a construction job, or maybe they're just not capable of doing that. Their minds are just so clouded, or they're just so confused, or they're not competent enough to do that. Well, that's a different issue. But there has to be a job for people to do. Being a mother is a very fulfilling job. Incredibly fulfilling. It's a constant, every day, raising your children. And think of the fulfillment that a woman feels being a mother. Incredible. or a man for that matter. I mean, a man, there are many men nowadays that raise their own children to a large extent. And there's nothing wrong with that, and it is very satisfying. And this is a failing. There's you know, the government has incredible amount of control over our lives. There is such a thing as social engineering that goes on. All governments participate in social engineering because they have the power. They have control over the media. The media, if they wanted to, could encourage people to build, fix, replace, customize. There could be campaigns to clean up everything, clean up the environment. We talk about lowering the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but how often do people talk about cleaning up the environment? Just cleaning up the trash that people throw out and getting people in the mindset where they don't befoul their own nest. And this is something we see in other parts of the world. Around here, not so much. So what do? They get people who are being punished for crimes out there on the roads picking up trash. And you know, but that trash shouldn't be on the roads in the first place. But then again, that is a result of the difficulties that are people having with their low self-esteem as a result of not having useful work to do that makes them feel good about themselves. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. It's just an endless round. So right now, let's get back into politics a little bit. Right now, we're seeing a lot of protests against Donald Trump. And he is about to attempt to reinstitute the ban from these, I believe, 7 countries that were on a list of the major contributors to terrorism around the world, and they're mostly Middle Eastern countries. And so Donald Trump attempted to prevent people from entering the United States from those countries. And he engendered a firestorm of protest, and then a federal judge in Seattle ruled that he couldn't do that. He couldn't make that call and stop people from coming in. And so Donald Trump said, okay, then I will bow to your ruling. And some people are saying, you know, he really that judge really didn't have that power to just shut something down over the whole entire United States. But nevertheless, Donald Trump said, okay, well, then we'll shut it down. We'll let the courts decide. We'll let it go to the Supreme Court. And so now he is going to, here very soon, come up with another version of the executive order to try to stop these people who are potential terrorists from coming into the United States. This has been done before. Presidents have done this before. Even Obama did this for a while. And they want to get in some kind of they want to get a vetting process. And a lot of the people, of course, that enter the United States, we don't have any idea who they are. There's people from all over the various countries who claim that they're Syrians, but a lot of times they're from North Africa or other places in the Middle East or Afghanistan or Pakistan, but they all claim to be Syrians because they have the pass right now to get in to the United States. And oftentimes they use a different name, they have a false passport, but if they have a passport at all, and then they come in without any vetting whatsoever. In the meantime, ISIS is saying, we have people in the United States, and we're putting more people in place who are going to be all set sleeper cells to cause the havoc that most Americans are expecting to come in the future, that there's going to be more terrorist attacks. Now, some of these terrorist attacks are false. They never actually happened at all, or they didn't happen in the way that the government and the mainstream media, their lapdogs, the lamestream, the CIA funded and led media outlets, led by the 5 or 6 major multinational corporations that own all the corporate media. And they have a unified message, and they say the same things, exactly the same things, word for word in many cases, every day of our lives, pushing this. And then you have these rebels, this ragtag group of citizen journalists who are fighting against this monolith and trying to expose the truth and the corruption and the self-interest that is taking place in this dinosaur media, this failing media. Meanwhile, the dinosaur media is fighting back. They're trying to destroy, squash, marginalize the alternative media. And let's stop calling them the alt-right. They're not necessarily even right-wing. Many, many people right now are leaving the mainstream media. They're leaving the left, what they call themselves the left. They call themselves the left, but they're really not. They're not even left. There is no such thing as left-right anymore. But you do have the government version of reality, and then you have the other version of reality, which is everybody else. The thousands upon thousands of citizen journalists who are struggling to get the message out that tells the other side of the story, because all stories have two sides. The lamestream media, the dinosaur media, only tells the official version, which leaves out a tremendous number of facts, really important aspects. And you can leave out something crucial from a story and make its meaning completely the opposite of what it actually means. And we see this time and time again through clever editing, through outright lies, through the lies of omission, very egregious in the lamestream press. And so don't worry, the alternative also uses some of this, but you need the balance. You need to look at both sides if you're trying to get the truth. Because isn't that what we want? The truth? How do you find the truth? What is the truth? The truth does exist. I've had meetings with people or talks with people before in which they say there is no truth. You make your own reality. Well, no. That's not the kind of absolute truth I'm talking about. I'm talking about legal truth. What is true beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the kind of truth we're looking for. The truth that can be corroborated by, let's say, different cameras. Nowadays, everybody has a camera. And so much of what we see is photographed and then put on internet. And so you can look at this and make your own judgment about what really happened. And so we have to be careful. Because we can be fooled. People will try even to use video to fool us. Photography, they used to say, the camera never lies. Well, it's true that the camera never lies, but we do have ways of making sophisticated changes to a still image, to videotape, to film. Now these can be detected, and they take a while, and it's expensive to alter a videotape. But one of the great things about the modern world that we live in is that the the iPhones that we have with the cameras that take the video are immediately uploaded to the internet. So there's no time to go through this elaborate, expensive process of altering them. Like a Hollywood film, more and more today, when you watch a Hollywood film, what you think is reality is really not at all reality. More and more of this, the green screen and CGI is coming into play, and the CGI is getting more and more sophisticated, so that you're now fooled, the eye is fooled. You could be looking at a human being, and this will happen even more in the future, and that human being may not exist in reality at all, but you won't be able to tell. Your eyes, your brain is unable to differentiate between the real human and the CGI human. And this is very troubling, but it's something that people must be aware of. We cannot forget. This is why a high level of awareness of the levels that technology has achieved at this point and will achieve more in the future, that's important to know. One of the groups in the news a lot today is the Antifa movement, and that would be anti-fascist. Antifa, short for anti-fascist. And these are protesters, and they really started with the Black Bloc group. You can look it up. This is an extension of the Black Bloc, and they operate in much the same fashion. They dress in black, they hide their faces, and they use violence to try to make progress toward achieving their agenda, their political aims. The Black Bloc group first appeared at about 1998 during the big Seattle anti-globalism protests. And this is actually an agent provocateur group. It was discovered that the Black Bloc kids were actually trained agents, and they were trained in protest and violence and how to use violence to gain the political aims of the group that trained them, which was the U.S. government, through the CIA, the intelligence agency. These people are actually getting paid. This group actually appeared in my town one day for a protest, and I thought they were the most phony-looking group, I could say, that I've ever seen. These were people who were clearly employees of someone and were over the top and were in costume. They dressed in kind of a faux 60s look. It's like there were genuine anarchists back in the 60s, and hippies and yippies and just these crazies running around causing trouble because they were just crazy. And these people are sort of like pretending to be crazy, but they really aren't. And so people just have to know that when you are on a protest and you see people who hide their face, they very well may be CIA agents, agents provocateurs. They may even be police officers who are pretending to be protesters. And why would they do that? Why? And they do it because they want to give the police an excuse to crack some heads. So you have some peaceful protesters who are genuine, walking down the street with their baby carriages and the old people. And then you have these young people who are breaking windows, turning over cars, burning trash cans, causing havoc, harassing people, and Then the police come and close in and start cracking heads. And where are those people? They just vanished. Where are those people that broke those windows? And they're gone. They've blended into the crowd. They've removed their disguises, and they're gone. So there's a lot happening in the world, and we have some warm weather temporarily. So have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.